Hi. In this edition of In My View, we carry on with this discussion that we had started about the farmers' protests having had gone berserk in Delhi on the 26th of January 2021. Um, the first point that was being raised was this was violence on a large scale. But now that almost 24-48 hours have passed since the event, and there is time for us, that's the enough time has lapsed between the event and the present point at which we are talking about it, in terms of which we can try making sense of what exactly has happened. Ample amount of audiovisual data, ample amount of especially visual data of a certain type is now in the public domain for folks to make sense of what exactly transpired on the 26th of January and what was the narrative that was being spun in and around it. The very fact that the government of India did not address the causes which brought these millions of farmers to the borders of Delhi for the last 60 days obviously sort of indicated that the government of India did not want the issues to be addressed in the way in which the farmers demanded that they be addressed, namely the scrapping of the three farm laws. So the government of India's attitude in some way or the other was to tire it out, to see to it that after a point of time, a certain sense of fatigue steps in. They almost give up on this entire venture. And at some point of time or the other, this whole enterprise sort of dissipates. So there was a certain sort of an effort made at different points of time to talk to them. So almost 11 rounds of talks were conducted, 11 rounds of what can be called as inconclusive talks were conducted. So there was no solution which was forthcoming out of the entire thing. At the same time, multiple efforts were being made to cast aspersions on the very identity of the people who had gathered on the borders of Delhi. So this idea that they were secessionists of some type, they were insurrectionists of some type, they were seditionists of some type. But the one thing that always evaded them was a recognition by the government that yes, it's a section of the citizenry of India that finds fault with a certain act of the government of India and is in a situation when it is protesting against this entire thing by ways which are perfectly legitimate. So everything was being done to sort of provoke them, to sort of break them, to sort of disperse them. And somehow the other, the whole idea was, but let's just wish it away. It almost seems that the present government in Delhi, the union government in Delhi, is sort of in some way or the other haunted by this entire idea of what happened in almost the last 7 decades before this government was established by law in power in 2014. So this whole, it most of the time gives an impression that they are sort of haunted by something which says that there's so much which has gone before them, and in some way or the other they find it absolutely wrong. And everything that took almost 3 generations of prime ministers, 70 years of politicians to put into place has to be disestablished, has to be in some way or the other corrected in quotes, and has to be sort of revalidated and redone. And it has just, after everything has been said and done, just 7 years. So it's like this awareness that there's something that has happened for 70 years and we have such a short period of time at our disposal in terms of redoing it, in terms of correcting it, in terms of sort of putting everything in place in the way in which it would be acceptable to us. and that exactly leads to situations where of the nature in which these three laws were passed. So first there was an ordinance during the lockdown. Then there was a law which came as the lockdowns related to COVID-19 were being gradually moved to a position wherein things were opening up. Obviously, given the fact that the government is in power, it enjoys a preponderant sort of majority in the Lok Sabha, so it wasn't difficult getting these bills passed through the Lok Sabha. It was in the Rajya Sabha wherein these bills faced some amount of confrontation, some amount of opposition, some amount of very vociferous opposition, for that matter of fact. And the Rajya Sabha officials, the Deputy Speaker, got it passed on something which said that there's a voice vote, wherein there should actually in the Rajya Sabha have had been a vote which should have had ascertained the position of practically every single member. So a very clear division of votes, which is well documented, which is well laid out on paper, is what should exactly have taken place. But there was a voice vote which was rushed through, and the speaker awarded it to the government on a note which said that he heard one side, the side which approved of the bill, shout loudly in favor of the bill as compared to the other side, which shouted, in his opinion, feebly in opposition to the bill. So a bill which has the potential, as is claimed by the state, to alter the very way in which farming has been done in India, been passed by the speaker hearing something loudly and something feebly, sounds to be a gross misinterpretation of rules and laws and bylaws by which the House is conducted, if to put things as mildly as possible. So that's not the way by which parliamentary democracies are supposed to function. That's not the way by which parliamentary democracies do function in so many other parts of the world. Recording dissent in the House, taking it into consideration, going back to the drawing board, incorporating points which have been made during the dissent, finessing things as much as is possible as far as the laws themselves are concerned, and then putting a legal architecture in place which sort of enjoys bipartisan support, which sort of, in this case, in the Indian Parliament, enjoys multi-partisan support, sort of makes it difficult for the street to erupt in the way in which the streets around Delhi's borders have erupted in the recent past. But if this entire process of putting it duly in the Houses of Parliament itself is given short shrift, then obviously, if their representatives can't be heard, the people in whose name government is conducted in a parliamentary democracy have a right to make themselves heard. And this isn't the first time that this sort of thing has happened in India, wherein mass mobilization of a certain type with a certain objective in mind has gone berserk and has sort of deviated from its due path, and has made things very difficult for its leaders and the organizations that have gone about putting everything into place in terms of this popular mobilization. Well, this is definitely not the first time, and possibly would definitely not be the last time. So one just goes back in time almost 100 years ago. We are in 2021. In 1921, India started the non-cooperation movement, which was withdrawn in February 2022. And non-cooperation was started by Gandhi, who had left South Africa and had come to settle in India in 1915 with the idea that now he would never leave India and would settle in India for good. On the advice of his political guru, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Gandhiji tours the whole country to sort of get a pulse of what exactly is happening, what exactly are the problems that the people of India are facing as far as the British rulers are concerned. And the period between 1915 to 1921 sees him launch these small episodes of satyagraha in different parts of the country. So you have it in Ahmedabad, you have it in Bihar and Champaran, you have it in different parts of India, wherein he's trying to sort of it now in hindsight seems like these were pilot projects for the big one that came in 1921. So this idea that people have to be mobilized against the British government in a certain manner. The immediate context being the Government of India Act of 1919, the immediate context being the Rowlatt Acts, which were passed during the First World War and which were never taken away from the law books, and which were used to further tyrannize the people of India. So it's against a whole plethora of wrongdoings by the British government that Gandhi and the Congress decide that the non-cooperation movement should be started. Now, one can understand when one is trying to draw a comparison between what happened at the Red Fort on the 26th of January 2021 and what non-cooperation was in 1921. So one definitely understands the difference between the two. The 1921 movement is targeted against a foreign government. Howsoever strongly the foreign government might be making an effort to try insisting on this, that it's as Indian as anybody else can be. The 2021 actions are against a government which has been elected by the people of India, which is led by Indians, which is responsible to the people of India. So one does understand the difference that exists between the two things. And yet one is tempted to draw a certain sort of a comparison between the two. In terms of the fact that 1921 was India's first attempt at mass mobilization, a mass movement, which would be pacifist, which would be non-violent, which would resist tyranny by facing as much amount of brutality in the process as is possible. And brutality does come its way in ample measure. And then you have the incidences that happen in this place at Chauri Chaura in the United Provinces, as a consequence of which Gandhi declares that the entire movement has been withdrawn. And there are a lot of people in 1922 who disagree with him, with his whole characterization, with his whole understanding that something like that should never happen. And given the fact that it has happened, it is incumbent on him as the initiator of this entire activity to declare that he feels that it has gone astray, it has gone wrong, and hence it has got to be withdrawn. He termed it, he called it a Himalayan blunder, a blunder of immeasurable proportions. And what had happened was a mob of villagers, impatient with this whole idea of resisting British rule in a non-violent pacifist manner, jumps the gun. So you have this episode in which policemen are attacked, a police station is set on fire, and as a consequence of it, policemen who had barricaded themselves in the police station itself to save themselves from a mob which had set its mind on harming them, gets caught in this inferno, and as a consequence, you have 22 policemen who are dead. The ones who go berserk in 1921 are as much Indians as the policemen who died are Indians. There is no British person, there is no one who is English who is dead in this entire affair. And Gandhi's idea is this is wrong. The people haven't understood as to what exactly a non-violent movement is supposed to be all about, and what exactly is a non-violent movement supposed to attain at the end of the day. And so there's this idea that we recall the whole thing, and we dissociate ourselves from this entire thing. Of course, in 2021, there is nobody on the side of the law enforcing officials who has lost his life. They were definitely set on, they were definitely targeted, they were definitely beaten. But none of them, it can't be compared with what happened in 1921. But then it would also be beneficial at this point of time to make a small point about Shahid Amin's seminal study about the 1921 episode in his wonderful text on Event Metaphor Memory, where he tries to make sense of what did the farmers in this in these twin villages of Chora and Chori exactly understand by this entire affair that we have got to resist British rule. So on one hand is the national bourgeoisie, under the leadership of the Indian National Congress, trying to build up a certain sort of a mass mobilization against the government of India, the British government of India at that point of time. Then you have Gandhi's detractors of the variety of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, of course, who by 1920 have sort of got activated as far as national politics itself is concerned. And it was Jinnah who had the most to say about Gandhi's tactics and techniques of non-violence and pacifist movements, of how they would incense the masses, of how they would lead the masses to commit acts which would definitely not be approved by the government, and how the entire thing would land the Indian national movement into trouble. And Jinnah is brushed aside by the Congress. Jinnah leads the Congress. And lo behold, what you have is most of his fears, which were expressed in the period between 1916 to 1920, almost turned true in 1922. But of course, that was a way by which almost 100-year journey, if 2021 is supposed to be some point of significance, is what Indians embarked on in terms of understanding the significance of pacifism when it comes to popular mobilizations in search of a certain sort of a resistance to what is perceived to be wrong and what is perceived to be unjust. And the entire movement in 1922 is sort of put on hold. Everything is stopped. Gandhi and the top leadership of the Congress end up in prison. And of course, you have almost a whole decade that lapses between 1921 and the next one that would come in the form of civil disobedience movement in the 1930s. So a precious lesson being learned in terms of the fact that, at least as far as the national bourgeoisie is concerned, that it has to lead popular mobilizations, but it also has got to see to it that popular mobilizations do not lend themselves to a certain sort of hooliganism and violence. But nevertheless, the point remains unaddressed in 1921, and the point possibly evades a certain sort of consideration in 2021, that the national bourgeoisie as lives in the metropolises and the cities of India, and the Indian peasantry as lives in the villages of India, possibly live in completely oppositional spaces, in completely different spaces, wherein there isn't much that the national bourgeoisie can share in terms of the angst as far as the peasantry is concerned, about the conditions in which it labors, about the conditions in which it derives a livelihood out of its labors. Punjab is the last place for all of this. So in most of these regions from where the farmers have massed themselves on the borders of Delhi, a very frequent and oft noticeable thing, if one travels through the villages and the rural areas of these places, Punjab, Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, one comes across these motorcycles, two-wheelers, that make a roaring noise when they hit the streets, whose rear guard bumpers normally sport the visage of something that can be understood to be Bhagat Singh. So a Bhagat Singh either in a turban or a Bhagat Singh in a hat is what is normally discernible as far as these motorcycles are concerned. Uh, and of course, it has lent itself to multiple and varying understandings in terms of what exactly is the owner and the driver of the vehicle trying to convey in terms of this sort of a bike. But nevertheless, uh, what one gets is a very interesting sort of a thing, that there is Bhagat Singh. So, and obviously, most of us know as to what does Bhagat Singh stand for, what does Bhagat Singh represent, and how do we make sense of this entire Bhagat Singh phenomenon? At least, how does Punjab make sense of this entire Bhagat Singh phenomenon? So, for people who have, who can, for all practical purposes, be seen as uh, um, Bhagat's masses, the people of Bhagat Singh, whose idea was, as far as the 1928 thing is concerned, wherein they had dropped these leaflets in the Central Legislative Assembly, that we didn't intend to harm anyone with it, but we just wanted the deaf to hear. So for people who have sworn into the Bhagat Singh way of doing politics, 2021 and 2020, in terms of this mobilization in 6 and 7 degrees Celsius, outside the borders of Delhi, adopting a Gandhian mode of doing things, and a steely resolve that we are not going to give up because we know as to whatever we are doing is right, is quite a move as far as this entire period itself is concerned. So a Punjab that starts off with Bhagat Singh, a Punjab that moves on through partition, a Punjab that faces an insurgency in the 1980s, and then a Punjab that sits on the borders of Delhi to demand what it feels is a wrong that has been committed against it, righted in some form or the other, is quite a movement in terms of practically everything. And it seems that um, the people who are in government in Delhi possibly yet can't hear. They couldn't hear it in the 1920s, and they possibly can't hear it even now. And that is the sad tragedy of having moved from a colonial foreign government to self-government, uh, that the government can't hear, that the state yet can't hear. Of course, that doesn't mean that what transpired on the 26th of January is in any form worthy of any commendation. Definitely not. No one is commending it for any reason whatsoever. And now one knows for sure that this was instigated with whatever happened at the Red Fort was instigated with this whole idea that this entire movement be cast in a certain wrong light, and this entire movement be forced in a corner when it is forced to withdraw, almost something that happened with Gandhi in 1922. It seems that exactly was the intention. As far as these images which were endlessly played on television channels in India of Nihangs on horseback and with swords in their hands, the Nishan Sahib being put up on the ramparts of the Red Fort, it seems that everything said and done, possibly whatever television calls as Indian public opinion doesn't understand as to what is Sikhism all about. for all the loud noises that are made about the valorous Sikh. We possibly fail to, we possibly, the public, as elicited by public opinion by television, has idea of Sikhism which is almost self-willed. We just don't understand as to what exactly is Sikhism all about. How does it exactly operate? What are its constituents? What exactly are these different forms that make Sikhism? How diverse is the faith, and yet how united by a certain set of values and beliefs it is. It seems that after all that happened in the 1990s and 2000s, in terms of the changing image of the Sikh in Bollywood, Bollywood has yet not learned about what Sikhism is all about. Bollywood has yet not been able to educate Indian public opinion, whatever that is, as Indian television believes there is something called as public opinion, which has turned its back on this entire thing, about what exactly is Sikhism all about. Nihangs do move around on horsebacks, and Nihangs do carry swords. And most of the movement of the swords that one is seeing in those videos is of a nature wherein they are trying to possibly defend themselves. And that's exactly what the swords are supposed to be for. They're not supposed to go about being drawn against unarmed people who you intend to harm with a malicious intent. They're definitely drawn with the idea that one has got to defend oneself in the situation of what perceives to be mortal harm. So it seems that there has been a phenomenal sort of misunderstanding at practically all ends. But then possibly the government and possibly people working for the government, people working around the government, didn't anticipate as to what exactly would happen if the tractor rally is allowed to go on. And then it possibly also is that someone at Delhi, on the side of the rulers, wanted to force this into a certain Chauri Chaura direction. And that's where it now stands. As far as the laws itself are concerned, in terms of the entire gamut of what exactly are these laws all about, and what are the different views and points which are being raised about it, in the subsequent episodes, we would definitely try to address this issue, and try to make some sense of what exactly is driving this entire agitation. Thank you.